This is part 2 of my past life in Mintaka. If you haven't seen the first one, please do, otherwise this video won't make much sense. So as I was talking last time, how that high dimensional woman was making that twinkling sound to comfort us because she couldn't communicate to us in a wake state any other way. So that night as the bombs were going off, and that I think we slept on the floor, and we couldn't use the upstairs staircase because that had been blocked off by some rubble. So even though our house didn't get bombed, obviously part of the roof had been damaged and had caved in at some point, but not when we were actually in the house. It was already like that when we came in. We couldn't sleep very well because it was uncomfortable. We did manage to get some sleep, but not very deep sleep. And we got like this intuitive message from this high dimensional woman, and she didn't say it in words. It was like a knowing without knowing. I don't know how to explain it, but she offered us to be able to leave our bodies and go to the other side. And I don't know how to explain it. Here we have to wait for our physical body to die before we can leave, and we can't leave our body until then. I've heard some NDE stories where people have left their body moments just before death. This wasn't one of these things. So when you're an extraterrestrial, in dire situations you can leave your body at any time. You don't have to wait for it to die in order to be able to do that. We don't seem to be prisoners to our bodies here. So, but no one chooses to leave unless it's dire. So people don't just take their life for no reason. We were offered this chance at this moment, and she told us, it's okay, you can leave. And my aunt and dad were already very grief stricken, and we knew that there was no other way out of this house, that we would eventually die, and we didn't want a slow death. We were already incredibly hungry. We hadn't ate for a while, and we knew that we would eventually starve. So my aunt and dad, they chose to leave their body behind, and it was daylight now at this point, and there was daylight coming through the kitchen window and through any cracks and ceilings on the wall. We didn't have anything like lights in our house, and our windows didn't have, we only had one window in the house, which was in the kitchen area, and in the upstairs bedroom area, before it had caved in, we would have the top part of our shell house would lift up on the top part of the roof, and that would let light through, and it was like a cone shaped latch, and we would unhook it and then the light would come through that way. We didn't have glass windows or anything like that, but obviously there was quite a lot of natural light coming through the cracks in the ceilings and the walls where some of our house had been damaged. In by cone shaped latches, I didn't explain that very well. It's the top part of the roof that comes undone is cone shaped, so we would just lift it up. So how on a shell the pointy part is shaped like a comb, that part would lift up. But anyway, my aunt, I saw her spirit, and she said, "Why didn't you come with us?" And I said, "I'm not ready," and she then just evaporated and disappeared. I was so grief stricken. Their bodies, even though I knew they were gone, their body was all I had left of them, and just looking at their bodies gave a great deal amount of pain. So I moved their bodies into the kitchen, and so I didn't have to look at them, and I left them there. But then I think I was in that house for one more day all by myself, and I had to sleep alone that night, and which was quite scary, being on my own in the dark. But by the time daylight had come round, I had slept for a bit right next to their bodies in the kitchen, because that was all I had left of them, and I just wanted to spend a few more minutes with them before I went, because I was planning a way to get out of the house. So after maybe lying down next to them for a bit, as morbid as that sounds, I then said goodbye to them, and I went up to the kitchen window. So the kitchen window was shaped like an archway, and it wasn't very big at all. I couldn't even fit my whole head through it. So I mentioned about going through it before, but I remember my aunt and dad saying it's too small, we'd never be able to squeeze through that. But I knew, because I was much smaller than them, that I would be able to shrink my body down to size. And there I knew that I could shrink my etherical body to small enough to squeeze through that window, but I knew it would take a lot of concentration and it'd be extremely difficult to do. So I remember concentrating so hard, and eventually I shrunk my body small enough that I could squeeze through, and it made this weird sound and it gave off a weird sensation. And then this took a lot of concentration. It wasn't a quick process, and I felt so relieved when I got through the window, and then my body went back to its normal shape, and everything seemed eerily quiet. And I looked around, and there was just some shallow streams of water and mostly dirt everywhere, and far out, all pretty much all at the same. And there was like a massive pile of rocks I was standing next to on my left side that towered quite high up, and these rocks were black in colour, but they had brown rocks underneath them. Because of how high it towered, I used this to my advantage, and I thought, well, if I've got these rocks here, I can kind of slowly use that to hide behind and gradually walk my way out to see if the coast was clear. And it seemed like everything was fine, but then I heard like this sound of like this like UFO flying towards me, and I looked above, and there was this black shaped small UFO, and it shot down these pile of rocks, and they landed on me. And before I could even react, and when they landed on me, I couldn't breathe because the weight was crushing me, and it was holding me underneath the water. So even though the water couldn't drown me, because I could be under there for quite a while, being able to breathe, or at least being able to hold my breath for a long period of time, the weight of the rocks and having my face right down in the sand and dirt, which was what suffocated me. And I was crying really sadly out for help, and it's kind of like a whale dolphin type sound cry, but it sounds also nothing like that at the same time. I can't really explain the sound, but after a while of like struggling, I then came out of my body, and for a moment it was like blank, like I don't remember the bit when I came out. All I knew is all of a sudden I was in the air, and I kind of felt like, not explain it, like I felt like I was nothing, like as in I didn't have any kind of body anymore. I kind of felt like I was the air, and I was just observing like what was going on. I had forgotten for that period of time who I was, what my name was. I was just like an observer, and I saw like these reptilians land out of their ship and like start to lift these pile of rocks off of me. These reptilians had really long arms and like skinny bodies. I don't know how to explain. Their head was like not exactly like a snake, but it wasn't 100% like, it kind of looked like a combination of like a snake head and a T-Rex head, but not, their snouts weren't long, and it also had human-like facial features. And there was a female one there. She was like a golden brown colour with gold eyes, and then a male one who was black with red eyes. And she was lifting these rocks off of me, and I had no emotions, no thoughts. I was just observing. And as soon as they flipped my body over and I was able to breathe, I got sucked back into my body, and I was in like this confused state. Like I felt sadness, but I also felt confused, didn't know what was going on, who I was. I knew that I was slowly dying, even though I had just come back to my body. And I remember we're seeing like to my left side the male reptilian like looking at me, and he was making like these kind of T-Rex grunting kind of noises. I didn't understand a word he was saying, but I got the impression he was saying "don't die on me." And he had like his massive claws like on my head. So these reptilians have massive claws, and I just remember like it being all the way down to my face, near to where my nose was. And then the next thing I knew is he let my head go, and it rolled to the side, to the left, looking at him. And he was kind of, I don't know how to explain it, like in these high dimensions, he kind of looked faint. Like nothing looked 100% solid. And I remember seeing this brown planet that looked similar to how Jupiter looked in the sky. And I'd known this brown planet before, because in these high dimensions, like planets and stars had like consciousness, and you could telepathically communicate with them, which here is just like not possible. I'm not sure if this planet was ever solid, but I think like these planets here were like us, because obviously in this dimension like none of these planets exist. But like I have many memories of like being near my shell house and just casually walking, and there was like these rock things, and I was like jumping across them so I didn't have to walk in the water just for fun, you know, like what kids do when they like jumping across things. And, you know, telepathically communicating with this planet, asking questions, and then having to run back because I forgot to ask it something else. So I had been friends with like this planet and had communicated to it before, and I saw this planet start and a bunch of other planets rotating out of orbit and just floating away, and I felt sad that they were now leaving, so that they were leaving like our dimension and going somewhere else. I don't know why they were rotating out of our orbit. A part of me thinks that maybe they didn't like seeing what was going on in our star and was choosing to leave because they didn't want to be a part of that energy. And I think that these planets were more like us, like in a spirit form, than being like literal planets like how we have here that are like made from like physical material. I don't really understand it because I didn't get any information like memory wise on that, but I personally believe these planets were more like kind of like in a spirit form, just like us, and not like in a physical matter form. I believe the star we lived on was physical because obviously we can see them in this dimension, but I believe the other planets were not. I can't answer like questions on that because even I don't understand it. We also had 2 suns next to our planet, so we had a small one that was like, it would connect us to source, and that was like a really important sun. That one I believe was in spirit form. And we also had, if anyone knows about the Orion Belt and the other 2 stars that are next to Mintaka, there's another planet called Aladdin, something like that. Like, you could Google the name, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but we got like from that one, and that was like a physical star. But we also had another one, as I said, which was the one that connected us to source, which, or you could call God or divine, like whatever you want to call it. That planet that connected us to source wasn't much bigger than the moon, and this sun always stayed in particularly one place and it never moved, just like the other sun next to us. And it was more closely seen in Aya. That's another reason why Aya was like a really important place, because like the sun was much closer to it there. And like when you felt the warmth coming from the star, you felt an incredible amount of love. But like it also like helped like the life on our planet. And when, I don't know how to explain it, when the Reptilians destroyed this particular sun, it caused so much damage to our star. It almost like sucked the life out of our star, and it was helping the world that we lived in like die. But like Mintaka had like this protection barrier like over our star, and which usually would block out like anything that was like low vibration and energy or like negative. But when the Reptilians like destroyed the star, it made it very easy for them to break through this barrier. And I just remember seeing like these black shapes trying to break through our sky, and like our sky would look like a normal sky, but when they were breaking into it, our sky would then turn into like this blue fire. That was one of the ways of how they were able to come to our star and start destroying things. And there's other things that happened that I'll get to that a bit later, but the sun to us was incredibly important because it connected us so deeply to source, and we felt an incredible amount of love from it. And it also helped keep us all connected to one another in some way. So if anyone knows anything about Mintaka, its real name was Artuvia. Mintaka is like the human name that we've given it. But Artuvia translated to English is love heart home, because we felt so much love. And obviously the sun was like the heart of our star, and our star was obviously our home. Depending on the region of Mintaka, some people called it heart source home instead of love heart home, depending on where you were. So I do like remember the translation for like Artuvia, but I don't really remember any of the language other than that. I do remember like a few words that were given to me once in a dream, and I used to have a dream of like a woman showing me like these very, very prehistoric shells of like, and telling me like the names of these sea creatures, and it was like one of those spiritual dreams. So sometimes you can have dreams from spirit and they're very different from like regular dreams. Regular dreams you forget very quickly and they don't make much sense, but when you have dreams from spirit, they have a very different vibe to them. I don't know how to explain it, but if you've ever had a dream like that, you'll know what I mean. And like, another thing is, when I met a psychic once, she told me about this dream and I hadn't told anyone, and it's surprising that she had known that I had this dream, because there's not like a common dream like your teeth falling out or falling or like the usual kind of thing. And she was telling me how this woman that dreamed was telling me about shells from like a previous life that I had. But some of like the words that I remember are words like haunch shell, omorak, landrith, amatrix, and then hosk, which is a type of swordfish. And I'll show pictures on here to show you what they look like. And like these were drawings that I'd done like a really long time ago when I was a teenager. I'd even seen like quite a few years ago a YouTube video of someone talking about how they had a past life in Mintaka and how they were like a type of dolphin type Mintakan like mermaid creature, and she said she was something called a dolphatrix, which kind of confirmed the language to me that I remembered something called an amatrix. So it shows that there were certain like creatures that had the word trix in like the word. So like going back to the part where I was like dying and saw like the brown planet, when I talked about like seeing the dark shapes in the sky, this was obviously way before the part where I was like dying, so it was like an event that happened at some point, like when the star was first being attacked, but I don't know when that was. Probably before I started standing on those rocks and things started being fired. But when I saw those dark shapes in the sky, that was like during the day, not at night. Well, when we were standing on these rocks and there was things being fired at us, that was like at night time. So anyway, as I was lying there with my face turned to the side looking at that reptilian and slowly started dying, I just like slowly like faded away, and then I think I was sucked through some kind of fast kind of vortex tunnel. And then I came to the other side and there was a guide, and he's like explaining to me how I've got to go through a process to help me transition, and that there'd be like these many rooms that I could go in and heal and like interact with loved ones. It was kind of like a waiting area. And then he said at some point I'd have to have like a life review, meet like a soul family, and then officially like cross over. And like when I officially like cross over into like the white void, there would be no way for me to physically be able to go back to my body. Like it would be impossible. So there's a certain point with like the veil that once you cross it, you can't come back. So this is like where my memories are a bit foggy about what happened. So this waiting area, it's hard to describe what I was seeing, but it was like, I like explaining it was kind of like a giant maze that was made out of like these hills that had like doors that led to these worlds that other souls had created. And then there was like some waiting benches that people could just sit on, and there was like one guy sort of sitting there. So I went into one room and I found these two twins that I had known, and they wanted me to play this game of ball with them, and I had no interest in it. So this kind of like was like an area that had like these hills with like a giant hole in like the hills, which this gigantic ball could go into. And like these hills and everything had like these weird looking plants that looked very much similar to like coral and the kind of things you see under the sea, and like sea anemones and that type of thing, but also not. They're like very alien looking like plants, but they also looked similar to the sort of stuff we had in the ocean. And it was just like a weird area. And the weird thing is I remember like feeling like I was floating, like I didn't really have any legs, but my mind was helping me move like where I wanted to go. And they really insisted multiple times that they wanted me to play with them, and I just only wanted to look at the area. So they were pushing this giant ball along by standing on it, and then like having to walk the ball by standing on the ball, and then I don't know how they didn't lose their balance, and like they would jump off it when it got near the goalpost and let it go under the hill in order like to score a point. And it's just like a really weird looking area. Like, and also the area had really short, neat cut grass. I don't know how to explain it, because it's like I didn't have legs. It's like we saw each other have legs, but it was like we couldn't fully feel them, and it was almost like we were floating a lot of the time. Then there was like a memory of me being somewhere else with like this elderly man, and I felt like I had known him. I think he was my grandfather, or he was just an old man that I knew, because there was one memory when we were alive of like these weird looking shell fungus looking kind of plants, and they were really comfortable for people there to like sit on, but there wasn't enough for us all to sit on, so we would take it in turns. so we could just like rest, but they were just like super comfortable to like sit on, and we would hang around and talk in this area, and then some people would sit on these fungus shell things, and we would just take it in turns. And it was my go to like sit on one of these plants, and before, like, this old man, he wasn't happy that he had to move and let someone else take his spot because of obviously how old he was. He wanted to sit down a bit longer, so I said to him, you know, you can just take my place, and he was happy about that. So when I met him, he had like his own area with these fungus shell plant things, which I can't describe to you really what they look like, but and he was happy because he had like all 6 of them for himself. He said to me when we saw each other that even if, he said, the best thing about being here is like in the afterlife is that he doesn't have to share his chairs with anyone else. But he said that even if he did, he said he'd give up. He said to me, I'd give up my chair for you any day, Aya. I'm gonna stop here and make a part 3 because my phone memory can't save all of this in one go.